On the afternoon of April 8, 1941, a massive aircraft rolled slowly down a runway outside Tokyo. It was unlike anything Japan had ever built before. More than 100 feet long, with a wingspan wider than a football field, the four-engine aircraft vibrated as its propellers clawed at the air. Engineers from the Imperial Japanese Navy stood watching in silence as it gathered speed and lifted into the sky. Aircraft was supposed to change the balance of power in the Pacific. It was meant to give Japan the ability to strike targets thousands of miles away, across open ocean, beyond the reach of any enemy defense. Some dreamed it would one day threaten American bases, perhaps even the American mainland itself. But as the bomber climbed, something felt wrong. It climbed too slowly. The engines strained. The controls felt heavy and unresponsive. From the beginning, this aircraft was fighting against itself. What Japan had built was not a breakthrough. It was one of the most disappointing four-engine aircraft of the Second World War. And the greatest irony of all was that it began life not as a weapon, but as an American civilian airliner that the United States had already rejected. To understand how this happened, we have to go back to the golden age of American commercial aviation, into mid-1930s. Air travel was transforming the United States. Airlines were expanding routes. Passenger confidence was growing. And aircraft manufacturers were locked in fierce competition to build faster, safer, and more comfortable airplanes. The Douglas Aircraft Company had just introduced the DC-3, an aircraft so successful it would redefine air travel for decades. But even before the DC-3 reached its full potential, airline executives were already thinking ahead. William Patterson, president of United Airlines, imagined something radical. He wanted an aircraft that would make the DC-3 look obsolete, a four-engine airliner capable of flying from coast to coast without refueling. It would carry dozens of passengers, provide unheard-of comfort, and eventually even fly above the weather. In a pressurized cabin. At the time, this idea bordered on impossible. No airline in the world operated a four-engine landplane for passenger service. The technology barely existed. The risks were enormous. But the reward was equally tempting. Whoever succeeded would dominate commercial aviation. Douglas agreed to try, but only if multiple airlines shared the cost. United, American, Eastern, Pan American, and TWA pooled their money, creating the largest civilian aircraft development effort ever attempted. The engineering challenge was staggering. Douglas designers faced problems no one had solved before. Wings strong enough to carry four engines, but light enough to fly efficiently. Landing gear capable of supporting an aircraft weighing more than 60,000 pounds. Electrical systems powerful enough to support modern equipment. Controls that pilots could manage without exhausting themselves. Every solution added weight. Every improvement introduced new complications. The aircraft that emerged was called the DC-24. It looked like the future. It featured tricycle landing gear, allowing it to sit level on the ground. This made boarding easier, loading safer, and handling more predictable. Its massive wings spanned over 138 feet. Four powerful radial engines were mounted with slight outward angles to improve stability. Its triple-tail design wasn't chosen for aesthetics, but because airports simply didn't have hangars tall enough to house it otherwise. Inside, the cabin was wide and luxurious by the standards of the time. Passengers would sit in real chairs, not bench chase. Some configurations even allowed sleeping berths for overnight transcontinental flights. Air conditioning was included, a rarity in aviation. On June 7, 1938, the DC-4 prototype took to the air for the first time. At the controls was Carl Covert, one of the most respected test pilots in the country. The flight went smoothly. The aircraft flew, landed safely, and proved that such a machine was possible. But possible did not mean practical. As testing continued, problems piled up. The DC-4 was heavy, heavier than planned. Fuel consumption was far worse than projected. Its systems were complex and difficult to maintain. Mechanics trained on DC-3 South struggled to understand it. Performance numbers fell short. Range was disappointing. Climb rate was poor. When the prototype entered airline evaluation, the verdict was clear. This aircraft was simply too expensive, too complicated, and too inefficient for commercial service. One by one, the airlines withdrew. Douglas was left with an aircraft that had cost millions and had no future. Rather than scrap it, Douglas looked for a buyer. That buyer came from Japan. Officially, the aircraft was being purchased by Japan Airlines for civilian use. Unofficially, it was being bought by the Imperial Japanese Navy. Japan's aviation industry had mastered fighters and medium bombers, but four-engine aircraft were beyond its experience. Strategic bombing required long range and heavy payloads, and Japan did not know how to build such machines. The DCIV offered a shortcut. Douglas sold the prototype for nearly $1 million. along with its full set of engineering drawings, performance data, and even the wind tunnel model used during development. American technicians helped reassemble the aircraft in Japan, unaware that they were revealing the secrets of large-scale aircraft construction. For a brief moment, the aircraft appeared in Japan Airlines colors. Then it vanished. Japanese newspapers reported that it had crashed into Tokyo Bay. No wreckage was recovered. The story quietly disappeared. It was a lie. The aircraft had been transferred to Nakajima Aircraft Company, where engineers dismantled it piece by piece. Every component was measured, photographed, and analyzed. Japan believed that by copying the aircraft, they could improve it. What they did not understand was that they were copying a failure. The result of this effort was the Nakajima G5N, known as the Shinzan, or Deep Mountain. It was enormous, dwarfing every aircraft Japan had built before. It followed the DC-4's basic layout, using the same wing structure and landing gear configuration, but the fuselage was redesigned for war. Bomb bays replaced passenger cabins. Gun turrets sprouted from the nose, dorsal spine, and tail. More powerful Japanese engines were installed, at least on paper. In practice, they were unreliable, prone to overheating, and difficult to maintain. The aircraft was overweight, and the engines struggled to lift it. Flight testing was disappointing from the first takeoff. The Shinzan climbed slowly, handled poorly, and failed to reach its required range. It was slower than contemporary Allied bombers and could not operate at altitudes that offered protection from fighters or anti-aircraft fire. Japan tried to fix it. New engines were tested. Systems were modified. Nothing worked. The aircraft was trapped in a vicious cycle. More power caused failures. Less power made performance unacceptable. By 1942, the truth was unavoidable. The Shinzan could not fulfill its mission. The bomber program was canceled. Instead of being scrapped entirely, several aircraft were converted into long-range transports. Bomb bays were removed. Armament was stripped out. The aircraft spent the war hauling cargo and personnel to descend outposts. The strategic bomber meant to threaten America became a freight hauler. Allied intelligence eventually spotted the aircraft and assigned it a code name, believing it to be a dangerous new weapon. In reality, it was already obsolete before it ever entered service. Meanwhile, Douglas had learned from its failure. The company redesigned the DC-4 from the ground up, creating a simpler, lighter, more reliable aircraft. That design became the C-54 Skymaster, one of the most successful transport aircraft of the war, carrying troops, supplies, and even presidents across the globe. The lesson was clear. You can steal metal, you can copy shapes, but you cannot steal. Understanding. Japan bought an airplane, but not the knowledge behind it. And without that knowledge, the Deep Mountain never cast a shadow across the Pacific. If you want, I can now tighten this to exactly 30 minutes. Optimize it for AI voice, narrate, subtle pacing, pauser, convert it into a YouTube-ready final cut. Just tell me.